Who could disagree with the idea of, quote, clean eating? That's the name of a food trend that surged over the past few years that usually means cutting out sugar, dairy, and gluten from your diet. But is that really nutritionally good for you? Or is it just another in a long list of fad diets that say more about how we view our food system than offer a good plan for what to eat? Let's find out. Joining us now in Edinburgh, Scotland via Skype, Tim Squirrel. He's a researcher at the University of Edinburgh. And back here in our studio, Joanne MacArthur, founding partner and president of Nourish Food Marketing. Abby Langer, a registered dietitian, and Kim Dion, registered holistic nutritionist and editor-in-chief of Vista magazine. And we're delighted to welcome all of you here in our studio. And Tim, thanks for joining us across the pond in the UK. I think we need a definition just to get us started here so we all know what we're talking about. Kim, clean eating is what?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? It's not a scientific term, so everyone kind of brings their own meaning to it. If you were to ask me right now, as you did, I would just say that clean eating means trying to stay away from overly processed foods, trying to eat as much food in their real whole forms as possible. I don't subscribe to the notion of like cutting out any one thing or the other forever. I have a very balanced and moderate approach, but that's what it means to me. It probably means a lot of different things.
Joanne, how big a deal is this right now in the foodie world?
It's pretty big. I mean, when clean eating rose up a few years ago in terms of labels, big manufacturers have been changing their product formulations because they've been getting rid of anything artificial ingredients, artificial preservatives, coloring, because what we see, the consumer definition for clean eating is fewer ingredients, simpler ingredients. Can I pronounce them? Ideally, do I have them in my pantry? But we're starting to see the definition of clean actually evolve a little bit. So it's going beyond just the product to looking at the entire system. So how was the product made? Where did it come from? How were the workers treated? How were the animals treated?
So there's a political dynamic to it as well.
Yeah, it's growing. So are you eating clean now? In terms of some consumer definitions we're seeing, it's actually growing. How many resources were used? What waste came out of that? So it's really broadened.
Okay, these are all good questions we'll have to follow up on as well. Abby, are you a proponent of clean eating?
You know, I really dislike the term clean eating because, of course, like Kim said, it has no official definition. And when I see clients, they say, well, I'm eating clean. And I always have to ask them, what does that even mean? And more likely than not, they're cutting out some gluten, dairy, you know, and again, it means different to every person. But I do subscribe to the idea that you should be eating in balance. You should definitely try to eat less processed food, but there's a place in everybody's diet for all foods.
Even sugar?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Even processed sugar?
All
even
sugar's
junk
processed.
Sugar?
All sugar's processed. But yeah, I mean, I would be very sad if I couldn't eat Oreo cookies and cake for the rest of my life. What's life about, right?
If you can't have that.
Absolutely. It's normal. That's normal eating.
Okay.
Right? Just not all the time.
Let's
right?
go.
Our body needs glucose. Our brain needs glucose.
Yeah.
But
right?
better
You'll never
from
find an athlete who doesn't consume sugar.
No, I get that. But isn't it better to get it from a banana rather than
Yes.
an Oreo cookie?
I would say yes.
Yes, the answer is yes.
I mean, I think the issue when all of this comes up is just extremes, right? Everyone, especially media, I mean, we all jump to extremes. It makes good headlines. It gets you more attention on social media. So it's like vilifying one thing and the other thing is just so wonderful. And life doesn't work like that. It's all about balance. So, but I would say, is it better to get sugar from Whole Foods?
Of course.
Of course,
sure.
That's a no-brainer.
Everybody's on consensus with that.
Yeah.
Let me read an excerpt here. This was a piece that ran last year in The Guardian by someone named B. Wilson. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up. For as long as people have eaten food, there have been diets and quack cures. But previously, these existed, like conspiracy theories, on the fringes of food culture. Clean eating was different because it established itself as a challenge to mainstream ways of eating, and its wild popularity over the last 5 years has enabled it to move far beyond the fringes. Powered by social media, it has been more absolutist in its claims and more popular in its reach than any previous school of modern nutrition advice. Okay, Tim, let's get you to come in on there, particularly on the notion of powered by social media. You'd sign on to that, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, different social media platforms function differently here, but there's a huge amount of influence which social media platforms, particularly places like Instagram, have upon how people conceptualize what it means to eat clean or what it means to have a balanced diet, and how those notions change over time. So, for example, if you look on Instagram now, there's a greater trend towards the popularity of the ketogenic diet, which I guess contrary to what some of the guests were saying just now, popularizes the idea that you don't necessarily need to consume very many carbs at all, or indeed sugars at all, and rather that your brain, your body rather can produce ketone bodies, which will then provide your brain with glucose. So what that means then is that these fashions change, but also they change faster than they ever used to, because you're no longer reliant upon the print press as a means of propagating particular kinds of diets. Instead, you can rely on, for example, Instagram stars who you can pay a significant amount of money to advertise your product or advertise a particular kind of diet. And then they put up pictures of themselves and how much weight they've lost or how much muscle they've gained over a particular period of time. And then that will allow them to say to other people, look, you too can achieve this if you only adhere to these few principles.
Tim, I think you've just shattered my world here, so I need to follow up on this. Are you saying Instagram stars are not as authoritative as the people we have on this program tonight? You're not going there, are you, Tim?
I mean, I'm afraid I might have to. I mean, I tend towards an idea of authority as something which is socially constructed, something that is given rather than something which people necessarily have. And so, I can't deny you authority anymore than I can give it to someone else. It's all dependent upon the audience that I have and how I'm able to gain their attention. And so one of the problems that doctors and dietitians and so on and so forth have is that the way that they give their advice, I suppose, isn't sexy. It's not quite as attractive as the ways in which someone on Instagram might be able to give their advice. So it's unlikely that your dietitian is going to, whip off their shirt and show you their glistening six-pack in the same way that Joe Wicks might do on Instagram.
Well, we try to attract viewers here as opposed to repel them, so I certainly will not be doing that over the next 30 minutes or so. Is social media, our social media, behind a lot of this?
Yes, absolutely it is. People are very frustrated with mainstream media, mainstream nutrition advice, mainstream health advice, and they're going to social media because the people who post on social media who attract a lot of attention are sexy. They look great. They're providing alternative information that people are hungry for now because they just are distrustful and suspicious of mainstream food and media, and they want something different.
Do you find yourself having to compete with those on social media?
Well, I hope I'm not competing. I mean, there's always a level of you want to get people's attention because you want them to hear your message, and I've put a lot of time and energy into really knowing what I'm talking about. And I do feel like there is sort of the attention might be scattered because what sexy sells. It's the media. It's no different in
But that's what I'm wondering. Do you find yourself, I mean, here you've gone out and you've obviously got the education, you've got this publication, you've got this career, and then, some star's going to get paid several $1,000s to put their good housekeeping seal of approval on this, and who knows, they may have more schlep on this issue than you do.
And more influence.
That's what I mean.
Influence for sure. I try to some extent, put some blinders on when it comes to that because otherwise I would go crazy. And I'm not one for posting a ton of selfies, and it's just not my MO. So really, but I will say that my Instagram account is very curated. It's bright. It's fresh. I post pictures of smoothie bowls, #smoothie because I want to get people in the conversation. And I know that if I post a picture of something that looks brown and beige and ugly, people are going to say, see, healthy eating is for granola crunching. I'm not, no, I'd rather have steak or bacon or whatever, which in moderation, okay. But so there is a push-pull of I want to get attention, but I can't compete with the people who have 500,000 followers or 1 million followers because they take their clothes off, and I don't want to.
I think it has to be said that even though those people might have more followers than us, we do have the credentials. And in the end, I think people come back to us eventually when their trust in those influencers gets shattered, as it inevitably will at some point. So we just have to keep on doing what we do. I'm in the same boat as you.
Fight the good fight. Do you find yourself in a difficult spot trying to compete with all of what's on social media right now, which may not be completely, fact-based.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of pseudoscience out
Right.
there, right? Gwyneth Paltrow, the
Oh my
queen of
gosh.
pseudoscience.
Queen of goop.
Yeah, the queen of goop. And, we're a celebrity culture, whether we like it or not. Tom Brady, another great example. Love what he does on the field. I think he's pushing the boundaries as a 40-something-year-old, but he's got a new book out that says if you drink enough water, you won't get a sunburn. Like, that editor should be something.
Just for those who don't know, because we may not have a lot of football fans watching this program, Tom Brady is maybe the greatest quarterback of all time in the NFL. He's 40 years old. He's never played better than now at the age of 40.
Yeah.
He's going into the AFC Championship game this weekend for the 7th straight year, I think, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, guys like me listen to what people like Tom Brady have to say, because he's in his 7th NFL AFC Championship game, and he's 40.
You want to be like him.
And he's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never
So
mind-
he's got a great
never mind
best-selling
he's
book
married to a
out right
supermodel.
now. Oh, that too. Yeah, and he also is involved in food, like everybody right now. We're a celebrity-obsessed culture. We're also a food-obsessed culture.
But you think everything he says in TB12 is a lot of crap?
I think
I need to know.
Some of it. Do you think you can drink enough water not to get a sunburn? I certainly can't.
No, but he's all about pliability, right? He's all about eating lots of avocado and stuff for improved
He's
pliability.
vegan,
Yeah.
right?
He won't eat nightshades. He won't eat, which for your audience are, peppers and tomatoes and eggplants.
He doesn't eat this stuff.
No, he thinks they're inflammatory. There's never been any research done that proves that. He's really full of.
He's full of what? He's full of Super Bowl rings. He's won
He's
5
full
Super
of
Bowls.
Super Bowl rings,
Yeah.
but by you eating his diet, you are not going to be like him.
That's not going to happen, eh?
And I would like to just add to that, and from my perspective as a holistic practitioner, as a holistic nutritionist, what works for one person may not work for another. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. We are all very individual in our biochemical makeup. So, just because it worked for Tom Brady, hopefully it works for you, Steve, but who knows?
I think we can all agree, too, that his circumstances and Gwyneth Paltrow's circumstances and Khloe Kardashian's circumstances are so different from ours.
Mm-hmm.
They have trainers and chefs, and they don't live our lives.
Having said that, Tim, do you want to give this whole clean eating, clean food movement some credit in as much as it has probably got people eating more vegetables than they might otherwise eat? Is that fair to say?
Thank you for the clarification on Tom Brady. I wasn't sure who that was. I thought he was the guy who played Bane. But
It's a different one.
I actually wanted to cut in a little while ago because I think one of the things to note here is that these alternative or heterodox nutritional movements don't just spring up on their own, and they're not just because people look at Instagram, they suddenly decide one day that they want to take their dietary inspiration from it. There's a significant undercurrent of discontent aimed at mainstream nutrition. And the reason for that, well, there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the reasons for that is because of the feeling that people have been led astray by it. So they've been told their whole lives that if you eat whole grains and you cut down saturated fat and you eat a balanced diet, that you'll probably stay at a reasonable weight and that you'll live to have a healthy old age. But a lot of people haven't experienced that. They've died from heart attacks young. They found that saturated fat actually is pretty fine. There's an increasing amount of research which backs that view up, that in fact it might be sugar that's the primary culprit as far as a lot of disease burden goes. And so they are turning to alternative sources of information in order to try and find results that they never had. And another reason for that is that diets, or the idea of diets, have historically been extremely unsuccessful for the vast majority of people who pursued them. So the idea of a diet, the idea the word conjures up in your mind is probably of someone trying for a week, 2 weeks, 30 days, even a few months to lose a significant amount of weight by embarking on a radical change in their consumption. And I think one of the things that's notable about that is it often connotes the idea of failure. Whereas one of the things that the clean eating movement has tried to do, and they've moved away from that label now, but they more move toward things like the idea of a lifestyle change. One of the things they've tried to do is to embark on the idea that a diet is something that sticks with you for life and that you're meant to adhere to forever. And that's one of the things that people will get from the kinds of social media influencers that they won't get from other things. is the idea that you should be engaging in this as something which is a lifelong process rather than something which is a crash diet which you pursue for 7 days or 2 weeks and then stop and you just gain all the weight back because it was water weight in the first place.
I mean, that's a good point, right? There's no diets don't work because unless it's a lifestyle change, you're just going to put all the weight back on, right?
It's true, but the idea of clean eating assigns a morality to food that I personally don't think is healthy psychologically.
A morality to food.
Yeah, I mean,
How so?
if you say food is clean, then clean has an obvious opposite of being dirty, right? And people tend to associate their diet with themselves. So I see a lot of clients who sit on my couch in my office and say, I'm so bad, I ate this cake, I'm so bad. And I'm like, you're not your diet, but this is what happens. And so if you're eating you're eating clean and then you suddenly eat like a piece of cake, you tend to feel bad about yourself, and guilt and shame associated with any sort of eating pattern, it's just not healthy.
Not healthy.
And I feel like, yes, okay, we're moving away from diets, but I don't think it's any healthier.
Well, you all may not necessarily know who Tom Brady is, Tim, but I know you know who Nigella Lawson is because she's from your neck of the woods. And here's, we're going to play a little clip here. This is her 2 years ago discussing why she believes cutting out certain foods actually is a bad thing to do. Okay, Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
So many people always say to me, oh, what's your guilty pleasure, in eating? And I always feel like, really, the one thing you've got to feel guilty about is not taking pleasure. If you feel guilty about it, well, you're robbing yourself of that pleasure, and it seems to me just a crime.
A crime. Kim, just clean eating take the pleasure out of eating?
Of course it doesn't. I think the problem that I see here is that everybody is putting people in certain camps and they're defining them as like the clean eaters versus the people who don't eat clean. And that's just not the reality. There are people who like to promote a healthy way of living. And then there are people who take everything to the extreme. And that's a psychological, social issue. And it's a big one. And we can talk about that. We could really dig down on that, why we have body image issues and all that.
Dig away. Go ahead. You've got the floor.
Well, I just feel that, why does a young girl become influenced to be incredibly restricted in her intake of food when she sees other clean eaters? That's not about the message to eat healthy or eat more vegetables, and that's not about a lifestyle. That's about trying to look a certain way, and that's media. That is what our culture has done with the media. We're not valuable unless we look a certain way. So then when we see other women looking a certain way that we've been told we should look, we might become restrictive in the ways that we eat because if that's what's being told to us. But that's not what we're here about. That's not, and I would say, if you just asked me on the street, I would be a proponent of clean eating off the cuff of my head. I don't, but the way I define it is very different. So I also agree that being restrictive in any sense is psychologically damaging. So I don't think we should do diets. I don't think you should not have pleasure. I don't think they should be guilty pleasures. When I take pleasure in my poutine or whatever it is that I'm eating,
I take poutine.
Of course I do.
You eat poutine?
I eat poutine.
It's terrible for you.
It is so, but you know what? And this is the other thing. Sorry, I'm not going to filibuster.
Oh yeah, I should tell. Okay, tell our friend across the pond what poutine is.
Oh, poutine! It's
No, I've had it.
You had it.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you know.
okay.
So you know. I mean,
It
everyone's.
even exists here.
It's truly, it's just so amazing. But, I think that we take pleasure in things, and that's what we do. A lot of people think that people like me don't do that because I'm not posting it on social media all the time. It is a really like a conundrum of like showing your real life, inspiring people to make healthy choices. I do the best I can, but I take pleasure. I enjoy life. I think that your psychological makeup, like what stresses you out, is just as important, if not more important, than what you're putting in your mouth. So that's a whole other conversation, which I'm happy to have as well.
Well, let me go to Joanne on this part. We talked about the morality of food. Abby referred to, if clean eating implies a morality, then everything else is presumably dirty, and that's not good. Are you worried about that too? This notion that if we don't eat clean, we're somehow eating dirty?
No, not so much. I mean, it is assigning a morality. I agree with that. I think it's just human nature. We're always looking for a silver bullet. And as a generation now, we are less healthy, we're overweight, We have record levels of diabetes that, we didn't see in our grandparents and our great-grandparents' era. And so we're lashing out at something. It must be wheat's problem, or it must be fat's problem, or, so we're trying to assign blame. And rather than taking personal responsibility, anybody looked at portion sizes now versus, 30 years ago, and levels of activity, which are down. So, that's the root cause of everything. It's not because, somebody wrote a book called Wheat Belly that all of a sudden said gluten is bad.
What role does marketing play in all of this?
Oh, well, marketing plays a big role. Can anybody give me a definition of natural? I mean, we throw things out there that say to consumers, this is better for you, this is a better choice, without really understanding what it means. So I think as marketers, yeah, we've played that game a little bit, and they're, marketing is based on trends and fads, and we see what macro forces are out there, and we capitalize on that as marketers. That's how you sell more things.
So, Abby, if it says natural on the label, it may not be?
Means nothing. No official definition for natural. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Or clean.
And no laws governing
No.
what the packages of our food say to us. So when we're living in a really confused time, and marketers can put things like all natural or wholesome, people who are educated on the matter and who take the time to read up on these things might know, well, that's just a marketing scam, and I'm not going to buy into that. But people who are confused about food, and they're working 2 jobs and they've got lots of kids, they don't have time to like sort of distill what's actually happening. So they rely on those messages. And I think if there's a crime, that's what it is.
Tim, you trying to get in here?
Sure. I actually just wanted to really quickly return to this idea of morality being associated with food. It's there's a really great article by another researcher called Emily Contois, who wrote about the idea of dietary theology, and essentially says that a lot of food and discourse around nutrition and diet is inflected with the language of religion. You can think of sinful indulgence, or the idea of something being heavenly, the idea of obviously of something being clean or dirty, or a guilty pleasure. And you can see this as well with the kinds of communities which spring up around particular kinds of diets, where people will defend the dogma of their particular point of view or their particular dietary tribe with zealotry, as it were. Which I think is particularly interesting, but also changes the ways in which people talk about it, because it means that people aren't just arguing based around the evidence, they're also arguing based around the idea that what they are doing must be correct, and that they also need to, I suppose, gain some kind of credence for what they're saying and what they're doing by, or validation for that, by convincing other people they're also correct.
Tim, let me follow up by reading something, Sheldon, at the top of page 4 here. Let's do this post-truth diet graphic here. This is from The Guardian. We live in a blog culture where it's pitched as a triumph of democracy that everyone can claim authority, which means anyone who says that, actually there is an objective truth, is condemned. Nothing proves this more starkly than the way celebrities have filled the vacuum where experts used to be. Because who appears to have more self-esteem than a celebrity? And so, people with popular Instagram accounts are trusted over registered dietitians. Panel show politicians such as Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson are validated, and a reality TV star is elected president. Okay, I didn't want to get too political about this, but there it is in black and white. Okay, Abby, start us off here. Is clean eating a symptom of a post-truth culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely it is, because people are going now not for who's necessarily credible, but who offers the sexiest alternative solution to whatever ails them or whatever they think ails them.
Why is that a bad thing?
Because there's a lot of junk out there in terms of diet advice that people are trying to sift through. And, there are certain celebrities who are very well known who are giving the worst diet advice, and sometimes maybe even harmful.
But if I want to be more like Gwyneth Paltrow, what's the harm?
You knew I was talking about her.
Well, I just inferred. Yeah. What's the harm?
Because you're not her. And the diet advice and most of the wellness advice that she gives is not well at all. Can be very dangerous and completely not based in science.
Tim, you prepared to go that far, that it could not just be dumb, but actually dangerous?
So I think that some of the things which are propagated by celebrities, by Instagram influencers, probably are dangerous. The idea of a cleanse, the idea that you can lose a significant amount of weight by drinking, I think it's called fit tea, where Instagram celebs are paid anywhere between, I think it's $1,000, $25,000 a pot to advertise what is essentially just a diuretic. I think those things can be not just foolhardy, but can be dangerous if you're starving yourself, if you're undergoing various kinds of strictures on that basis. But I think the flip side of that is to say that there are some people who are talking an awful lot of sense, who have changed the lives of the people around them by the things that they've been saying. If you go on to so my field of research is the social media site Reddit, and there are whole communities on there of people who are giving extremely level-headed, quite nuanced advice on how to do your own research about what you should be eating, how to treat your own body as a sort of experiment ground so that you are able to consume the things that work for you rather than just latching on to whatever the latest trend is. So whilst it might be true that someone like Gwyneth Paltrow is propagating nonsense, dangerous nonsense even, it's not the case that this is universally a bad phenomenon.
Kim, let me follow up in this regard. Is it well known by people who go to Instagram and check out all these pictures and listen to all of these social influencers, is it well known that they're getting paid to offer those opinions?
I think it's pretty well known. It's hard for me to say because I'm just one person in the world of Instagram, so I don't know what's in the minds of everyone else. But I think Instagram is trying to make it more well known. I mean, I think they've put things in place where you have to say that a post.
It's the law now, actually.
It's
There
sponsored.
is a law.
Yeah.
If I post a sponsored post on Instagram where someone's paying me to say something, I have to put #ad. So, but a lot of people
buried in about
Hashtag.
20
ad or
hashtags,
sponsor.
though.
You're not even supposed to
right?
do that. It's the law that has to be above the fold. But a lot of people I've seen, especially celebrities, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because I wonder whether people who are on Instagram a lot and take their cues from these people understand that there's a financial conflict of interest going on here.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on who the user is and how savvy they are in general. But I mean, I certainly see it, and I certainly see it in a lot of influencers who are just. It's just one ad after the next. And for me, I think, well, then I wouldn't trust anything coming out of that account because it's obviously everything is just done to be paid. Whereas, full disclosure, I've been sponsored to post things about brands that I use and love and trust. The whole thing is so interesting because we're just looking to everybody for answers in this food and chronic illness era that we're living in. Whereas, there was never a need for people like us before dietitians, nutritionists to guide people on their food journey because we were so close to the food that we ate. We just knew what was working and what wasn't working. I mean, we might have had sanitation issues, but overall, a healthy diet was where you lived and it came from the earth and you knew what things looked like coming out of the ground. And now it's so confusing and we are so busy and there's so much convenience food and we've looked to packages and now we're in a pickle, so we're looking to people for advice. And it's just such a big issue.
You know what I think also is when celebrities and people who give the wrong advice, so to speak, when they give that advice, usually it has actually a kernel of truth in it. And because the general public is not very good, or they don't care to do it, they're not very good at deciphering and interpreting nutrition research, that they just follow along. And, if it sounds good, then it must be okay.
So there is a kernel of truth in drinking more water to avoid getting a sunburn?
That one, probably not.
Probably not, all
but
right.
a lot of,
Checking.
what Gwyneth Paltrow says, for example, may have this tiny kernel of truth, and her followers or whatnot spin it out of control.
Tim, is it possible to find that sort of sweet spot in the middle ground between diet absolutism and still being able to think critically about the food that we eat?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the other guests have hit the nail on the head when they say that it's all about trust. Because ultimately, when it comes to nutrition, there's so much research and so much of that research is so varying in quality that it means that what you decide to believe is really a function of who you decide to believe. And so the question then becomes, how do you decide who to believe? And I think there are a few ways that you can start to do that. I think that it's best to look for people who aren't necessarily trying to sell you something, or if they are trying to sell you something, it should ideally be something that they're not making money off of. So they might say, if you're looking to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, it's generally quite difficult for someone to have a monopoly upon sourcing that kind of thing. If they're saying that their particular supplement is the only way of achieving a particular goal, then they're wrong, and you probably shouldn't listen to them. But also there are other things you can see as well. So are they willing to change their mind? Do they provide you with citations to the kinds of things they're saying? Or they link you to published research on the kinds of claims that they're making, and so on and so forth. And I think that one of the ways to start to move this conversation on from should I be eating X, eating Y, cutting out Z, is instead to be moving it on towards how do we decide who has our best interests at heart and who is simply trying to make a quick buck. And I think that's probably the most interesting question at the heart of this.
Agreed. I remember Johnny Carson used to do a show back in the 50s called Who Do You Trust? So who do you trust? How do you know, Joanne?
Well, it's interesting you talk about trust because I think this is at the heart of it. There was just a big Canadian study that looked at who do people trust. Number one, farmer. They were ahead of doctors, they were ahead of teachers, and certainly we're seeing food, if you think about it, it's incredibly intimate, right? And so we want to know who actually made our food. That's why you're seeing huge resurgence in farmers markets. People actually want to know who made my food. What's the story behind my food? So
It's interesting.
the origins
in the middle of the biggest city in the country, there are farmers markets every weekend in the most dense parts of the city.
Absolutely.
Because people want that.
They want that, yeah. And there's huge issues right now worldwide because it's become the sourcing of food's become incredibly complex. Like generations ago, we didn't bring food in from China. So the whole food chain has become very complex, and there's huge fraud issues. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 10 people every year get sick from contaminated food. So there's a reason why we're not trusting our food source the same way we used to.
In which case, Abby, ultimately, who should we be taking our cues from?
Well, that's difficult.
Besides you, of course.
Besides me, of course. People, Tim was completely right. I mean, if people who aren't trying to sell you something that they're saying is the only way to be healthy, people who aren't giving advice that's not credited or not based in science, and just people who are a little bit more educated about what the advice they're giving.
I think, like, to further that conversation even more, I think we have to go back to trusting ourselves. Yes, it's good to look outside for information, but I think we've really been so disassociated from our own, how things make us feel. How does something make you feel after you eat it? You're too busy to notice. So I think if we go back to because like I said, we're all individuals. So what's going to work for me may not work for you. So I think we really have to, be educated and then listen to our bodies. What are they telling us? And definitely not use point systems and eating a tiny bit. Like you could have a Kit Kat bar for the entire day and still lose weight. I mean, that's terrible. And then you're not getting your nutrients, your micronutrients or vitamins, anything like that. So I think this points are bad.
There's so many rules now.
Yeah, rules.
And eating has gone from intuitive to rule-based.
You know what the biggest rule is on this show?
What?
When the clock's up, you got to go. Guess what?
All right.
The clock's up.
Oh.
I've learned so much today.
Bring us back.
And particularly that poutine is apparently now one of the major food groups. I did not know that.
No.
Tim Squirrel, good of you to join us on the line, on
Thanks
Skype,
so much for having
from
me.
Edinburgh, Scotland, from the University of Edinburgh. Thanks so much. And back here in our studio, Abby Langer, the registered dietitian, Joanne MacArthur, founding partner and president of Nourish Food Marketing, Kim Dion, the registered holistic nutritionist. Good of all of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.